Well, Australia will continue its rollout of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine after a Victorian man was admitted to a Melbourne hospital with blood clots just days after receiving the AstraZeneca jab. The green light from the Therapeutic Goods Administration follows decisions by the German and Canadian governments to restrict AstraZeneca rollouts following similar cases. To help us all understand this, me included, I'm joined from Melbourne by emergency physician and former Vice President of the Australian Medical Association, Dr. Stephen Parnis. Thank you for coming on the show, Dr. Parnis. I listened to you on radio over the weekend and I thought you were absolutely brutally simple, and I think that's what we're all desperately after at the moment as we're sort of getting all these mixed messages. Take us through AstraZeneca and this clotting issue versus other sort of general COVID complications we're hearing about.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Peter. Well, AstraZeneca is a vaccine that is the principal one that we have available in this country. And there has been news or reports of cases around the world of a very rare syndrome, one that most doctors would never see in their entire practicing career, something that would happen maybe one in every few 100,000 cases sometimes. This is where the body makes antibodies to platelets, which are important for clotting, which stirs up clotting and can cause clots in veins in places like the brain or in the tummy. And it's a serious condition when it occurs. There have been case reports across places like Europe, and that has influenced decisions of some of the national regulators about who they make the AstraZeneca vaccine available to. We have had one case in Australia, and this person is currently at Box Hill Hospital, of a 44-year-old man who some days earlier had the AstraZeneca vaccination and has presented with this serious condition affecting this person's abdomen. Now, the questions are these. Is the vaccine responsible for the condition that this person has had in Box Hill and other of cases around the world, or is it not? And that's very difficult to prove. But even without a conviction there, the question is it enough for us to reassess whether the AstraZeneca vaccine should be rolled out? Now, the TGA and the expert advisory group on vaccinations in this country have been looking at the evidence, not just one case in Australia, but overseas, and their conclusions at this point are steady as she goes, that the risk of something that happens in maybe 1 in 100,000 cases or something in that sort of risk needs to be measured against the risk of getting COVID in an unvaccinated community. And the risk of getting serious illness from COVID is far, far higher.
Give me a sense, though, if you're someone who's got general clotting risks, if you've had a stroke previously or you're on a blood thinning drug, you know, your doctor's been concerned about clot risks, would that change whether you get the vaccination? Usually not, actually.
You're right to say that there are many people out there who have issues around forming clots. Things like clots in the deep veins, clots that have gone to the chest, clots that are a risk if you've got an irregular heartbeat. They're very common scenarios, things I and my colleagues see every day in medical practice. But they are nothing to do with this very rare syndrome that is potentially associated with the vaccine. And generally speaking, these people who are on blood thinners or other antiplatelet medications have no reason not to go ahead and have the vaccine. Of course, it's essential that they discuss their own individual issues with their treating GP and specialists. But generally speaking, having clots in the past, being on blood thinners is not a reason to avoid the AstraZeneca vaccine.
I mentioned at the top of the show that the impact of the virus in Italy, they've just gone through a lockdown. I was at a wedding over the weekend and I spoke to another guest. He was a surgeon. He'd only just returned home to Australia from the UK. I think he'd only been home out of quarantine for about a week. He was telling me stories of colleagues of his. He would have been in his mid-40s. They were in their 50s dying of coronavirus in hospitals he was working in the UK. It was very front of mind how dangerous this disease was to him. And he was looking around the room, and of course we're there and it's a wedding and people are mingling, there's no masks. He said it's like a parallel universe from where he's come from. Do you think we're getting complacent about the COVID risk? We're not understanding perhaps what we were last year, that it is a killer?
Well, there may be a degree of complacency in some regards because by world standards Australia has done incredibly well. But I think there is also a great degree of anxiety about how best to proceed because no one really has gone through a pandemic in living memory. We are, I think, all to some extent, particularly in Melbourne, traumatised by the second wave, by lockdown, by the daily numbers of cases, and also the stories of people becoming desperately unwell. We know that even 12 months on, the rest of the world is still going through some terrible traumas. And you pointed out Italy. I mean, Italy was where those nightmare scenarios in February, March last year were playing out, where they were at risk of running out of intensive care beds, and we thought we might face the same situation here. The fact is that wave after wave of the coronavirus and COVID will continue until there is a circuit breaker. And the only thing that will change the game is widespread vaccination. And that's the only shot we've got. Otherwise, we will have outbreaks. And heaven forbid if we have another outbreak that gets out of hand like it did in Melbourne last year.
All right, in a word, would you have the vaccination, Dr. Stephen?
Well, I have had a vaccination. I had the Pfizer vaccine because I'm in the front line as an emergency worker, but my eldest daughter is also a health worker and she's had AstraZeneca, and I fully supported that. So I would say what you're offered is the one you should have, and it's the right thing to do.
All right, Dr. Stephen Parnis, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Peter.